In this episode, we're answering some of our listener questions. We'll be covering how the average investor on a low income can ensure that they don't buy a dud investment, how to avoid fad design trends that will date and devalue your property, timing your sale in preparation for retirement in a slowing market, and the pros and cons of buying a family compound.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, and author of Auction Ready.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say on here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of a professional.
Don't forget that you can access the transcript for this episode on the website, as well as download our free full or forecaster report, Which Experts Can You Trust to Get It Right? theelephantintheroom.com.au.
So let's kick off with our first question. It's from John, and I love it when you start a question with "Love your podcasts." Thank you very much, John. He said, "Love your podcasts, but I was a bit puzzled by this last one." So that was a few episodes ago, episode 230 with Evan Thornley, where he kept on about land, and every farmer and most people know that land is valuable, according to John, but not even those mums and dads investors who may have accrued good equity in their homes can invest upwards of $1 million for a house. Or perhaps he's asking most can. Well, we know that most can't. So John's question is, he's probably very out of touch, he says, but even when I'm investing, the most I could manage were units and not house with gardens in decent areas. So how does that lead the future of those of us who could only invest in units or indeed only afford to live in a unit if we want to be where we can see those city lights and not want to see or tree change to beautiful but inaccessible places? He's even made a reference to my business. Even good deeds won't look at property under $1 million in Sydney, which would be a unit and fairly basic one at that. Now, when he's referring to the interview with Evan Thornley, that was all about this idea that not every property rises in value or falls in value at the same rate. And Evan had done some research on Melbourne property performance, and he'd come up with some interesting assessments and I think sort of landed on some real truisms, but there were some things there that weren't necessarily universal in terms of their principles. So I guess to start off the talking point, Chris, using equity to borrow, invest $1 million, how do people do it? How many people can do it?
Look, it's probably pretty tough in 2022, but it wasn't tough in 2012 or 2013, 2014. It started to get really tough, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So borrowing capacity has been falling, really. You could borrow 10, 12 times income back in 2014. I was just shocked. If you knew how to play the system and you could play it against different banks, etc. So affordability is two factors. Have you got the borrowing capacity and have you got the equity? And equity, if you've got a house, potentially you don't need that equity to cover a 20% deposit. You could pay lender's mortgage insurance and cover a 10% deposit, for example, and then you're going to need 5% for stamp duty. So I'd be surprised. Also, prices would have been a lot cheaper back then. So I don't know when you're doing these numbers, etc. But it was pretty easy in the past to potentially stretch the houses. If you knew how to play capacities and you had a reasonable amount of equity, I'd be surprised whether you could do it. In today's market, absolutely, it'd be tough. You're probably looking at 5 times salary, in 2022. Last year it was probably 6.5, maybe 7 times salary. But that's way down from 10 or 12, right? So it's really tough to, buy, so your limited resource is borrowing capacity. And so what we're suggesting on this podcast is if you've got a limited resource, use it wisely, get quality assets. And I think when you were looking at unit performance in, say, Melbourne and Brisbane versus houses, it's, chalk and cheese. Sydney, it's a bit of a basket case, in the quality housing markets or the premium housing markets, units perform just like houses almost. But in areas where there's high density, they haven't done anything for, a long time besides the 2015, 2017 boom. So fundamentally, to go and borrow $1 million, you need some equity. And ideally that to cover 20% deposit on another property. But you also need borrowing capacity. The rent itself doesn't allow you to go and buy properties. It's a complete myth out there that you could just keep on building portfolios. Now, you could have in the past, maybe, if you got super high yielding property, maybe under really relaxed borrowing capacity, you could potentially. I still don't really believe you could. But, your rent, if you times that rent, let's say it's $600 a week, then you minus 20% off that $600 a week. So let's just call it $500 a week. If you times that by 52 weeks, let's just call it 25 grand a year, right? If you times that by 5, that's how much money that rental income allows you to borrow. So $125,000. Now, you're not going to be able to buy a $500 a week property for $125,000. So that extra borrowing capacity to allow you to buy it, that comes from your income. And so, that's how that's unfortunately the reality. And so it's not to say it's elitist, you can't buy property and, you have to buy houses, etc. But, Veronica and I have done nearly 250 episodes here. What we're highlighting is that just getting a property is not always the best option. Maybe not buying, maybe looking at topping your super up, maybe just paying down your mortgage, maybe, start going into shares. You've got other strategies. Property's not the only way, especially if you're not going to get something quality.
I think on the unit thing, there's also a bit of a myth that you can never make money on units, or that all units are inferior to houses. And this is a bit of a problem, I guess, with this episode, in the sense that we did talk very heavily on land value. And yes, land is what appreciates and the building is what depreciates. However, not all units are equal, and also historical buildings have scarcity. And so like an Art Deco apartment, for instance, you can't build them anymore. They don't build them like that anymore. They don't have those period features. They don't have those few apartments on the big block of land. So you've got land value there, but you've also got a value in the scarcity factor of historical buildings. And same with warehouse apartments. If it's an authentic warehouse conversion, that's got scarcity factor. So there's actually, I believe, an appreciating asset in the actual building, because you can't replace it. If you knocked it down, you're not building the same thing anymore, and therefore you can't replace it just with a newer version of what's there. It will lose some of that intrinsic value that actually makes that property really desirable. So when you're looking at apartments, there are lots of examples that I can show you in Sydney anyway, of individual apartments that have done better than houses, some houses in same suburbs. And that is, if you gave me a budget of, say, and you're right, $1 million doesn't buy you much in Sydney, and we're almost out of it being able to buy you anything sort of A grade in an area, sort of within the, say, 15 Ks of the CBD, shall we say. Almost. There's like borderline in some spots. So that door's about to shut. So you're absolutely right about that. But if you gave me, say you gave me $1.5 million, in some inner city suburbs, you can still buy a little house, right? But in those same suburbs, if you bought a quality apartment, you will actually do better capital growth-wise than a crap house. Crap house with really bad floor plan, really skinny, really steep stairs, no chance of a bathroom upstairs, or maybe only one bedroom, tiny plot of land, might be in a bit of a seedy spot. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to make compromise after compromise after compromise on a house for that sort of budget, even though it's not impossible. There are some people out there that, when the people that say, oh, land is where the value is, you should never buy an apartment because you should always buy a house on land, they're the ones losing in that equation. So you've got to be very careful with these blanket statements, and I guess we are the world of nuance here, the elephant in the room, talking about all the anomalies. So I would say don't give up. If your budget is for an apartment, don't give up. But, when you're looking at a place like Melbourne or Brisbane, where the massive oversupply has had an impact that's reverberated across the entire market, you've got to be even more careful than you potentially have to be in Sydney. But there's also some regional markets and bigger regional centres where you could buy a house. So there are other options. You just have to be super, super careful. And it's not true that all land close to the city makes good investments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think putting a Sydney hat on, you've got to think that as house prices get too expensive, people will look at, tier 1 and tier 2 regions, Central Coast, Wollongong, or even go to Newcastle, or even go, but at some point they can't just keep traveling and traveling and traveling. And that's why we saw a massive increase in those prices in 2020, 2021. And we're still seeing the portion of people that are getting very good flexibility and remote work, and they're still looking at regions. I think they're almost getting a third wave of people who wish they did it in 2020 and 2021 are starting to come back and say, maybe I should reconsider this. Maybe this is my opportunity. Couldn't do it the last couple of years. But that's not mass market, I think, that are getting that remote work. I think it's if anything, it's going back to the employer. But once that happens, let's say that is, but if you can't leave the city and you can't get a house in areas that you really want to live, then absolutely you'll move to, making it work in apartments. Plus migration, if people are moving to Sydney from around the world, they want to, when their family visit, when their friends visit from overseas. And why do they move to Sydney? Because they want to live around the lifestyle, around the beaches. They don't want to move, 60 kilometers from the city. And so absolutely that demand, and they're used to living in apartments around the world. But where they're going to want to live, they're going to want to live in low density, in areas where houses are really expensive, and in areas where just due to NIMBYism, they're not building more apartments. And so you just got to sort of understand that not all apartments are equal. But yeah, absolutely. In those markets, just due to demand and supply, I think they'll do really well, especially with things like the stamp duty change that's likely to happen in the next 6 months.
In New South Wales.
In New South Wales, under 1.5 million, you can definitely get into top unit markets under 1.5 million and then benefit from something like the stamp duty change. So hopefully that was helpful. But yeah, budget's really tough. If you want to get a quality asset, you need a budget. And Veronica and I don't make any apologies about that because, if you want to go to someone in the property space that will buy for you, absolutely, you could call up any broker or call up pretty much most buyer's agents, and they just ask you what your budget is, and they'll just go buy you something. They won't really be thinking this big picture, what's actually going to work for you.
And look, that leads into our second question, which we've already half answered, which is from Lara, which is how can low income and single income families invest in property when buying in blue chip areas is out of reach? And I think that focusing on buying a quality asset is 100%. And so it doesn't have to actually be a blue chip area. And I think that this is the thing that, I guess it comes down to what's your definition of a blue chip area. So people might think, the eastern suburbs of Sydney is the only blue chip area, right? Because you might say that the inner west by comparison isn't blue chip. And however, people have done extraordinarily well investing in the inner west. So I guess that concept of what's a blue chip area, you could call, Palm Beach a blue chip area, but people typically haven't actually done very well in terms of investing in property in that area. So really, I think there are plenty of non-blue chip areas in that typical sort of sense of blue chip that do make very good investments. I think the importance, though, is getting those fundamentals right of the location. And that is that you need to have good employment opportunities where people can earn good incomes or can commute and earn good incomes elsewhere and do that work from home / commute. You also want a diverse population. So you don't want just one demographic. You don't want just retirees, or you don't just want first home buyers. You actually want a diversity of age groups, family makeup, incomes, all that sort of stuff. You also want good lifestyle and amenity, and also no oversupply. You've got to be very careful that if you're buying into an area that is not landlocked effectively. So one of the reasons the inner city areas have done so well is because there is just an absolute scarcity of supply of land, and you can't make more land. So in order to get more land, you've got to go further out, which means further away from all those amenities, that a longer commute, all those sorts of things. So if you can find those you can mirror that or mimic that in nice, solid regional towns where you've got all those other factors, then, you can get some good investment opportunities well and truly outside what might be typically seen as the blue chip areas.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the lower your budget, the lower options you've got, or the smaller amount of options you've got. And that's going to push you to certain pockets. Then you're going to start to face more issues around the type of demand, who can afford to live in that area, who want to live in that area from an aspirational point of view. You're going to open yourself up to supply because you're going to be forced to more apartments and units and townhouses versus houses, etc. So it is tough, it is tough in that sort of one income or, because if you times that income by 5, that's how much roughly you could borrow, and that's tough, right? So if you're on $60,000 a year times 5, 300 grand, well, where are you going to buy something for 300, right? You're going to have to play in these markets. And unfortunately, you're going to take the most risk for probably the least return. And so you're actually the one who's probably the most vulnerable of making a poor decision. You might buy a studio apartment on a busy road just to get into the market. Then 5-10 years later, you try to sell it. You sell it for exactly the same thing. Then you got your costs and et cetera. So, it is tough, and that's the reality. And so what you do need to do is try to play it a little bit smarter. So if you are going to play in those markets, you try to buy on a better road. You try to buy the better one in the block. You try to buy in the pocket where they're not building anymore or got the best So in that marketplace, you get the best asset you can possibly get, the most scarce asset, the most desirable to as most markets as possible. And obviously something that you can obviously live in long term and give you stability and security and other things you need rather than just capital growth.
Yeah. Otherwise, there are other investment options, and it might mean not borrowing money and just sort of chipping away at investing in something else. And of course, we're not able to give you investment advice on this podcast. We can only talk about properties, and you need to seek out that advice. But there are alternatives, and a lot of people just think that it's property or bust. I like property because I can drive past it. Even if it goes down in value, it's bricks and mortar. I can see it. I don't understand the share market. Or I don't understand, bonds, or I don't understand whatever it is that I also might be able to invest in. But I think it's very worthwhile understanding the risks associated with just buying one property if you can't buy a good one. Yeah. And I would always encourage people to go out there and research other alternatives. Our third question is from Stuart, which is, thanks for your excellent podcast. Thank you very much, Stuart, which I've been recommending to every single person I know who is considering buying real estate in Australia. We love you. We all know about some of the design choices from homes from previous eras that notably date the house in a negative way. Pastel orange, green bathrooms from the 1970s, tiled kitchen countertops from the 1980s, glass bricks from the 1990s. Oh, yeah. The question is, what are some of the design trends of today, the 2020s, that people should think twice before incorporating into their houses? And so he sent that through. He said he suggested we could talk about trends about the physical layout of the house, such as uni-purpose media entertainment rooms, or trends to do with decoration of houses, such as a current trend to paint rooms with black walls. No need to read out this paragraph, he says, but I did think it was worth reading out. Right. I think one of the things that I see a lot is black taps, right? Now, black taps date big time, and taps are actually quite expensive. And so it's like when I look at a house that's got black granite bench tops and beach cabinetry, right? I basically go, that was built in 2000. There's certain design trends that you can go, bang, I know exactly when that house was built or when that kitchen was done. So I guess there's those that carbon date a property, and then there's those that really render it really, really out of touch. And I think the reference to the glass bricks of the 1990s for me is a classic. And angled rooms. The 90s angled rooms are a nightmare. You basically have to gut houses to renovate them. You can't just work within an envelope. And so I think I look at those things that are structural. The black taps you can replace, but the things that really do mess up the flow or honestly, diagonal shaped rooms, diamond-shaped rooms, the 90s have a lot to answer for. Currently, I see a lot of rounded corners, and I wonder about those.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, right? The curves so in fashion, but, are we going to be regretting those in the future? I think the colour bond explosion with, the add-ons to
the boxes at the back.
Yeah, and I feel like they were cool, but I feel like now they're looking a bit dated. And, like you've got a beautiful heritage frontage and then you've got this colour bond sort of extension at the back. And so I just feel like it's not aging anywhere near as nice as the front. And I just wonder whether, better materials could be used on these extensions, and everyone's doing it as well. So I feel like it's losing that sort of real uniqueness to it as well. So I would say that's something. The glass bricks are funny. We actually knocked out some glass bricks on our house because it was making the place look quite dated. But God, they were solid. Smashing those things up and put a new window in, some louvers, and yeah, absolutely, it changes the thing. So I would say that. The only other thing I'd probably say maybe is it too much open plan? Like, everyone wants this open plan, the kitchen, dining, the lounge room. And COVID sort of highlighted, but maybe we've gone too much open plan. Maybe we need these little sanctuaries, these little areas where, a house back to, separate living areas a little bit. I don't know. Maybe that's something that I think maybe we're shifting back the other way. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess it's just what you want to do is appeal to the most markets as possible. When we were doing our renovation, my heart and my confidence level was, just keep this quite neutral, right? Light oak floors, white walls, keep the kitchen quite minimal because it'll appeal to the most people, and not get too excited about using colour and everything like that. because I think you can definitely, minimize your market if you start putting, really bright bathrooms and things like that. Either people will love it or hate it, and it's just maybe a bit too risky. So just got to be careful. Are you renovating to sell one day, or you're renovating it for yourself? And if you are, you just got to be careful that you've got good taste.
That's the good taste is always very interesting. The thing that, like for instance, currently engineered floorboards. So you just said oak floors. I'm guessing you've put engineered floorboards in if you've said that.
Well, yeah, to put proper timber floorboards in. I mean, over a big house, I guess it's hard to. You can do like black button. We did look at that. I don't know. Well, you don't like engineered floorboards?
No, I don't. And I think they'll date. And I don't think they don't wear as well either. And I've seen them on stairs where they basically delaminate on the edges of the stairs. So if you're not very careful with those floorboards, they wear very badly. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people put them in. And I know they're not necessarily cheap either. But I do think that they are problematic. Interestingly enough, I have a ColourBond box at the back of my house. Me along with everyone else. What I've been noticing though are ColourBond boxes on top of apartment buildings. That's been of recent years. That seems to be that the 3 or 4 levels of apartments are brick, and then on top of that is a sheeted. Low weight, I guess, upper level. I wonder how hot they are. I really do, because I've got lots and lots and lots of insulation in mine, but mine was specified by my architect to me. I didn't buy it off a developer who may not have invested in the same level of insulation that I've invested in. And I think too, the open plan thing is a really good point. When I first started in real estate, everybody wanted open plan. We did start seeing a shift even before COVID. And I think partly that is when you got very, very little kids, you want open plan. But when your kids get a little bit older, you want a separate space for them as they get noisier, and that they can actually be outside, from under your watchful gaze. So I think the value in having separate spaces has crept back in, certainly. And I think COVID, has brought in, like, for instance, the home study, that didn't used to feature in every floor plan the way it does now. But I do think also that whole media room, that entertainment, the what do you call it, the video room or whatever. There's certain project homes, I guess, that always have that included in their design. But I really wonder about how many families do you sit down there with the popcorn, the specially designed movie seats watching the big screen. And the other thing that I notice a lot is the use of stone. So travertine, for instance, that would date you around about 2005, I think. And it's expensive stone. It was used extensively in bathrooms, and some houses had it all through the living areas. But my God, that dates a property. And that's expensive to move. Like if you paint a wall black, you can easily fix that. A couple of extra coats of undercoat to get rid of the black, but you can easily fix that, right? Even replacing the wall is easier than replacing all the floors in your house when they're travertine. So it's a matter of choosing materials if you are going to renovate, that when tastes do change, the cost to change them is not prohibitive.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not allowed to do a renovation in our new place for a few years. So it's something that's always goes through my mind, what's the best way to do renos. And I don't think I've done a great job on this one. I winged it and didn't really control the costs probably as well as I probably should have, and probably spent money where I'm not going to see that money ever again, but some I've added value to. So it's a real art and skill, I think, to be able to renovate really well and to get the best financial result. Because you can always improve lifestyle by spending money on renos, but does that give you the financial return? And that's something you'll never know until you sell, really. And it really depends on the market you sell at. So, I think these are good conversations for people to be thinking about.
Fourth question is from Jean. We are 55 years and nearing retirement. We have a property and a townhouse as an investment that really is my husband's super. We owe on each property. Our aim is that when we sell our townhouse, the money left over will be paid into our super. After getting an estimate from a few real estate agents on how much we could sell it for, we went back to the accountant to crunch the numbers. If the market could not reach what we need, we must hang on to it. We need to keep working and paying it off. Also, we got a bit nervous with rates rising. However, we've been assured assured that in the past we had it lucky and that the average is around 7%. I love that. They live in regional Port Macquarie that is always growing, so the investment is a goodie and so are our tenants. So after hearing what the accountant says, crunching the numbers, we will hopefully have more informed decision as to what to do next in terms of a plan. My question is this: can you have a foolproof plan or should it be revisited every, say, year?
If you like what you're hearing here, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars, please. Every review helps make it easier for other people to find us and hear what our amazing guests have to say. We love hearing your questions and we're planning more listener Q&A episodes. Please send your questions in. You can send them via the website, which is theelephantintheroom.com.au, or directly via email to questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au.
Well, I think absolutely you should be, looking at your plan every year. I mean, Jean, I thank you for the question. I just probably want to be thinking this through a little bit. So you haven't got any super because you've got your property and your townhouse. I would think that, if you're 55 and you are sort of working, I think you've really missed a trick there if you haven't been looking at your super and maximising your contributions and really understanding, also your limits around what you can put into super. I'd be just really conscious around all that. I'd be really bit careful just taking blanket numbers around the capital growth. The average has been 7%. Well,
I think they're referring to interest rates actually.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you really need to be going on a townhouse. I don't know, in Port Macquarie, you've just got to be careful what the performance of townhouses have been versus houses, and where your townhouse is. And I think also that this danger of if the market's not going to give you a certain price, you've got to hang on to it. That's assuming that the market will give you that price in a time frame that's reasonable. This is a challenge that sometimes investors, they almost want the market to do what they want to do rather than the market being a market. For example, I'm not going to sell out of the Aussie stock market till it's at 7.5. Well, you could be waiting a long, long time, and maybe you're accruing an opportunity cost that you could be doing that money, i.e., if this townhouse is worth 600, maybe that's a good price, for example. That means you could put 300 grand into a share portfolio, which is growing for you faster than that 600 grand townhouse is growing. So just be really careful with that because you could be building an opportunity cost there. Absolutely, you should be really thinking about your retirement if you're at sort of this age, and really thinking through the benefits of potentially working longer. I know this is not probably what you want to hear, but one of the biggest issues with retiring is this going from full-time work to not working. I think that's a big transition for people, and sometimes it's better sort of slowing it down gradually. But also, if you can stop accessing your pool for as long as possible by just getting enough money through income sources to cover your living expenses, just delaying that money, a period till you start drawing down on it has a huge reduction in your sequencing risk, in terms of if you get a big market fall or longevity risk, which means you run out of money, because you might think, my life expectancy is 86. Well, you could both live to 95, and so inflation costs could get out of control. So just be really certain that, you've got enough money when you stop working. The best way to do that is potentially extending your income if you can in some form. Just even if you can just get the 20 grand a year tax-free for both of you just through some jobs has a huge impact on giving you better chances through retirement of not running out of money. So hopefully that was helpful, but absolutely I'd be looking at it every year and maximizing every year because things change. The concessional contribution caps changed. For example, you could only put 25 grand in a year a couple of years ago. Now it's 27 and a half, the government brought in this retirement exemption to where you can put more money into super if you downgrade your house over and above the normal caps. And so, things are changing on an annual year. Stock markets are changing. Maybe it's a good time to start to sell down your portfolio from 80% in shares to, 50% in shares. So, or maybe it's not. So, there's definitely things to be reviewing on an ongoing basis.
One thing that I would add in there is that, Chris is talking there about potential opportunity costs. So you can have opportunity costs if you hold a property that isn't that great, and you could be doing other things with your money. You could also have opportunity cost if you sell a property that's actually going to do fine. It's just that you sell out of it too quickly, and then you've got less money invested because you don't have the borrowing anymore, and also you have to pay capital gains tax on any gains. So when you do that, you've got less money to invest effectively, and so therefore your returns are going to be less. So it all comes back to, do you have a really good asset? And so I know that people often think they've got a good asset if it rents well. Now, that is not the marker of a good asset. Now, at the moment, pretty much everything's renting well, and so everyone could think that every single property in this country is a good asset, but it isn't. The good asset test is this going to be easy to sell to a wide range of buyers, even in a crap market? That's the sort of litmus test for, have I got a good asset? Will there always be demand for what I have? Now, if you've got a sort of property that's got quite limited buyer pool, and it's hard to be honest with yourself about this question as well, because most people don't want to go, I bought myself a dud asset, particularly if you've only got one investment property. You don't want to be thinking, I shot myself in the foot because I didn't know what I was doing at the time. Yet, can I tell you, most people do, because it's easier to buy a crap asset than it is to buy a good one. So by really looking at and asking yourself those hard questions, and it might be that you need to do a bit of research here to really just look at, well, how have if it's a townhouse, you can actually look at the performance of other townhouses in the same complex. That can be quite informative. And you can start doing a bit of research, get into the sold section of realestate.com.au and start saying, right, well, what did the last one sell for? Can I see other properties that sold over that same period of time? And have they done better or worse or the same? And if you can start building up your market knowledge in that way, you can start to get a better sense about whether your property is likely to perform well or not. And that then, as long as you don't force to sell for financial reasons now, that then can inform whether or not you choose to sell. The other thing I would say too is that when you buy, we often talk about this, people try to time the market and try to be real clever about it. And, I bought it at the bottom. Yeah. We've talked about this so many times. It's impossible to pick the peak or the bottom of a market. When you buy is absolutely not important compared to what you buy. But on the other side of this whole equation, at the end of the property lifeline, if you like, lifetime, when you go to sell it, that is important. So if you have discretion over selling, then yes, it's always better to wait for better market conditions, unless you've got an absolute dud asset and you could be doing other things with that money in the meantime. So hopefully that all helps.
I think they're really good points, Veronica. I think especially around because if that's what your asset base is, your house, your townhouse, etc., when you sell, will have a huge impact because you finally crystallize that. And also, you might be working now, so your investment property, you may pay less tax if you sell it when you're not working in terms of capital gains tax. And so you can play into that. Maybe you might want to sell them over different years, especially if you've got multiple properties, etc. So yeah, absolutely, you want to be careful when you sell, but not get too greedy with it, because people who, for example, would have thought last year is a great time to sell. Maybe we'll wait till next year, so we get a little bit more growth, or a bit of a reality check, right? And then maybe they missed the market earlier this year, etc. So things can turn pretty quickly. And so what you want to be doing right now is de-risk your retirement as much as possible.
We've got a question here from Jess. She says, I'm not sure if you've covered this. I've tried to check your back catalogue, so that's pretty diligent, so we have to ask this question, right? She said, I'd love to know your thoughts on buying a block of flats in an A-grade location as a combination of investment and your primary residence, perhaps joining two to make it more livable for a family. I have a friend who has done this, 6 units on the beach in Elwood. Beach views and a huge backyard, Airbnbs, rents the rest. What are the pitfalls of combining an investment with your primary residence? It appeals to her. She's saying living where you want, yet having the security of yield to support you long term. She says, my friend is now happily living exactly where he wants, albeit not in a traditional house, but the aspect and views are spectacular. The backyard is huge and his children have apartments they can move into in the future. Am I missing something? Is this a terrible or a great idea? I understand it's not ideal for capital growth, but isn't this strategy as fast-tracking getting you into your favourite suburb, creating an income stream and securing a property for your kids in the future too? So there's a lot in this one, and it's a very European thing to have a family consortium effectively buying a building and having multiple generations living in the one building. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
So I'm not sure if he's done this all by himself,
or with the friend,
or with somebody else. But let's say they've done it all by themselves. Buying 6 units in Elwood probably would have cost $3.5 mil, if not $4 million. And so the decision here is, do we buy a house on a standard block in Elwood, which you should be able to do for $3 or $4 million there, or an apartment block? And yeah, I mean, the benefits of the apartment block is maybe you get 4 of the 6 you can rent out, and you can get a bit of income there, but you have to pay tax on that. That means you're also getting only a third of the capital growth tax free. And maybe there's benefit if it's a block of 6 in Elwood. Maybe there's benefits of owning the whole block in terms of being able to knock it down and build 20 apartments. Maybe that could be a benefit of owning the 6, which we're not factoring in here. I personally be thinking in my head, am I getting 3 or 4? If I'm spending $3.5 million in Elwood, could I be getting $3.5 million a better asset for that from a capital growth point of view? And then discounting the rent, because there's a lifestyle benefit there as well. And saying, if I've got 4 places for rent, what am I going to make really after tax on that? And is that benefit outweighed by the paying extra CGT? And then potentially, if you wanted to, one of the benefits of owning the 6 is that you could potentially, if you do need money, sell down one of the 6, right? You can't sell down your house. So that would be as you get closer to time, you just keep selling off the apartments. I think, buying it for the kids to move in one day, I don't really like tying financial, buying assets for the kids, in that building, because, then if the kids don't really want that asset, they want to have something else, then they're going to have to sell it. Buying something for them to move into rent, that's I would say that you can just rent something else. So
what if your kids don't want to live there?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what actually happens. People think, the kids, when they get older, they're going to want to live close to mum and dad. Well, when you're a kid in your 20s, you don't want to live close to your mum and dad, right? You want to go and explore the world. You spent 20 years living with them. So I think when people are trying to do things for their kids, I would say try to just build wealth as a family, right? Get yourself in a better asset position as a family. So when they need help in the future, you're able to provide it for them, rather than saying this money's for that and this. Because I think you could do better if you think that family wealth philosophy. You can make better decisions because you're not tying it to, buckets of money to kids, etc. So anyway, I don't know. I would say it's also really difficult to go and buy a block of 6. You'd probably be competing with developers, to go on. And so are you paying a premium for that block of 6 versus over the market rate of what those 6 would be in the marketplace? And probably are, because, maybe someone is thinking about, doing a knockdown or a development or something. And maybe you haven't got the capacity to do that.
A lot of maintenance also in buildings like that. And I think often people aren't thinking about what they're going to have to spend on an annual basis to keep it up to scratch. I think some people are very much hands-on investors, and they really like to have everything within the arm's reach. And I guess a very hands-on investor would love to control their asset in that way. And obviously, and I think Airbnb, if you're not going to outsource it to someone like, Kieran, yes, and that costs a lot of money to outsource to an organization like that. So Airbnb, it sort of does need hands-on management, particularly if you're that close. So for a certain type of individual, it might suit really, really well. But I think there's a level of romanticism around owning a block of units. So I get quite a lot of our clients come to us and go, really like to invest in a block of units. And it's a bit like me liking to invest in old shops. I don't know, I've got this thing about it. I've never have actually done it because I've talked myself out of it every single time. But I've got this romantic notion about owning an old shop. God knows why, So I'm just as susceptible to this sort of idea. So I always find, usually when I talk to investors about the idea about buying a block of units, when you sort of start digging, you realize that there's this level of emotional attachment to staying together as a family quite often. And also there's sometimes this emotional idea about, I can get better if everyone joins in. And so you asked the question at the beginning, does the friend bought it himself, or has he gone into some sort of consortium with other people in the family? And I've spoken to a number of people who have had this idea of, well, we'll all join forces and then we can all as a group buy this block of units. I think it's fraught with danger if you're going in as a consortium, and unless it can be strata titled easily and you can sell out of your assets. So there's a lot more pitfalls, I guess, in the structuring of it in terms of how it's being financed and how many owners are going to be taking part of it, and also the expectations of what those individual units will be used for and how they're going to provide a return. And I think there's a lot of really crap buildings out there as well, you know, in apartment buildings that, and really, you know, the renovation works might be way more extensive than you might expect as well in these sorts of buildings, because everything has to be multiplied by 6 or however many apartments are in the building. So there's a lot to consider. It's not an outright no, I guess. A lot of it depends on location and personal circumstances and the type of investor you are. But I would think most people, it's just a romantic notion you probably should move on from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just really thinking through. I mean, to buy 6 units in Elwood, you probably, I've just looked on here, there's actually a block of 8 units, for example, now it's mid-3s. And for mid-3s, you could get absolutely a decent property in Elwood for that. I've just looked at houses that have sold as well. So,
but you wouldn't have the offset, the income from the units to offset your cracker house that you're buying. But I guess on the long term, when you sell it, you don't have to pay capital gains tax either.
Yeah, so you could probably do them up numbers on that. So you'd probably, you know, let's say you're renting out each apartment for $600 a week. Probably a bit optimistic, but let's say it is. They're 2 beds. That's $3,600 a week. If you times that by 52, it's about $190,000. If you discount that by 20%, that's like $150,000. And if you times that by 5, that's about $750,000 of your capacity. And so, yeah, you're getting rent, so it's allowing you to borrow more money, but it's only borrowing an extra $750,000. You still need a lot of income to go and buy $3.5 million a unit. You know, you're still going to have to be on $500,000 a year, probably, if not more, as a couple. So, yeah, and I would just say, look, for that extra $750,000, is it worth going down this, buying a different, having to pay capital gains tax, having all the issues of having less space and having the lifestyle compromise of having living in apartments, and trying to join apartments is weird. You know, how do you put your bathrooms at different edges and your kitchen? And I don't know, I don't think that idea really works in practical. You know, apartments are, you know, the floor plan's been built for that floor plan. It hasn't been built so you could double it.
I've seen it done, and not often successfully, I have to say. And I think too, you know, this the idea that you can sort of keep everybody under your roof, if you've got that type of family and it works for you, then great. But I don't think all families, the Anglo-Saxon way isn't that way. So potentially, if you're coming from a cultural background that's more baked into your DNA, then it might be a really great option under those circumstances. All right, last question is from Andrew. It's a bit of a slightly unusual one. In Brisbane, Queensland, do they have bigger, wider roof gutters, downpipes to allow for the tropical rainstorms that they get up there to get the rain away quick enough? Also, do they have deeper gutters in the road so shops don't get flooded? Hope this made sense. He lives in Adelaide, and we get some decent rainstorms, but not as much as the tropics, and I get worried about roof gutters are going to overflow on some more severe storms. Now, I'm not sure if he gets worried because he's just generally one of those people who really worries about all sorts of things, or he's thinking about going to Brisbane and he wants to make sure that when he goes there, the water can get away. But it made me think of episode 228 with historian Margaret Cook, who wrote that book, Brisbane, it's a river with a city problem. And I did do a little bit of research on this in terms of building codes, because they do vary depending on where you are, and the sort of the terrain, and also the natural disasters that may or may not be frequently experienced in different areas. So you will have, for instance, building codes up in far north Queensland there'll be provision for the fact that there's a lot of cyclones up there. In bushfire areas, you've got building codes where there's provision to any new building is it has to be built to certain codes, and certainly in flood zones, absolutely that as well. I guess the big issue there is that often older buildings are non-compliant under new regulations. So things change all the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every single building in an area that suffers these sorts of events is built to cater for them. And we're always, learning new things. Like, think about Victorian houses, the steep stairs. I've seen stairs that I reckon are about 45-degree angle. And it's like climbing a ladder. They will not pass muster now. You wouldn't get those approved now. Yep. In fact, you wouldn't get and so those houses that might have 2 bedrooms upstairs, purely by virtue of the fact you could have such a steep staircase, now with the returns and everything that are required, you probably only get 1 bedroom in because of the staircase. So balustrade heights, it used to be that you could have lower balustrades until people started falling off balconies. And so then they raised the heights. Window openings in apartments, people falling through babies, falling through holes through windows. Now that there's these requirements to have them shut or open, restricted openings. So this all changes constantly. And I would think that we're going to be experiencing that. And I think seeing changes in building codes continually, particularly as we suffer more from climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's really important to think through if you had to know building codes, because if you are looking to do a renovation, etc., and there is prohibitive costs. For example, our new place is bushfire zoned, right? And looking at past, DAs and what they've had to do, putting on shutters that are way more expensive and have to be on all the windows. And, there's like one reno I've been tracking as well. They wouldn't be able to get the balcony approved they've currently got. It's like a wooden balcony. Doing an amazing reno, like top notch. But they've had to leave this wooden balcony and they can't really touch it, to be honest, because then it looks like they're just renovating it because it wouldn't get approved today. So it's beautiful reno, but then they've got this old balcony on the front, right? And so, I think this whole building codes thing is a bit of an issue, and I think it is going to get more and more to consumer trying to be safer, etc. So, thanks for the question. I didn't do any research, so I'm glad you did.
Oh, there's a bit more actually, because there's infrastructure, right? He mentions the guttering, right? So, or the drains. They are infrastructure was designed around understanding and local conditions at the time and then upgraded over time. So more recently developed areas would typically have better drainage than an older area. And so you'll see retrofitting programs. There's a retrofitting program on water pipes just a couple of streets away from me at the moment because, I don't know, they've been supplying us with our drinking water through these hideous old clay pipes and all sorts of crap in them. And now they've got these brand new pipes going in to upgrade our drinking water. So, and there's such a thing as a national construction code. And then that's overlaid with state-based regulations, and then local councils have development control plans with specific requirements for flood zones. So I think the long answer for your short question, Andrew, is that yes, they do, but you're going to find more in the newer developed areas and newly renovated areas than you would find in the older established areas. It's a work in progress, I would think.
So, Veronica, have you got a property Dumbo to finish us off today?
Oh, God, there's always so many, and now I didn't come prepared. Have you got one?
Oh, I would just say at the moment is that if you think about from a buyer's point of view, is that what else would you want to go in your favour, especially if you're in a situation where borrowing capacity is your friend. You've got a lot of borrowing capacity right now. And so you've almost got all your competition struggling with borrowing capacities. They're all fearful. They're all worried about rate. The media's kicking up a storm. Vendors are really nervous. It's we can make an offer and they'll definitely take it to the vendor and they'll most likely consider it. What other market, if you could say this market in 2021 or 2020 or 2019 or even 2018 was so hard to get finance approval. Right now, it's really easy to get finance approval as long as you haven't got a bad credit rating, really.
That's classic.
So access to credit's really easy. The perfect buying conditions, and everyone wants to sit on their hands. And I think, the danger is right now is the bargain hunter is they do take action when they go and get a bargain, because if things do get worse than they are, then the bargains actually get smashed even more.
Yeah.
So if you are going to go into the market right now, the worst thing you can do. So but you've also got the opportunity to buy a quality asset, and I do think that if you just are out there right now, your chance of succeeding on that's actually quite high if you can make solid offers. And now's actually the time to use buyer's agents. I know we use them a lot, but I actually think now is even more reason, because what you want is that first access. There's little quality assets on the market. And in hot markets, you should always use buyer's agents as well, just to get that competitive advantage. Any edge is better than going, property to property. But I just think right now is, it's really, what else would you want in the marketplace? Yes, you could potentially buy something cheaper in the future. But if you're gambling on that, you got to think, what's the risk is if you don't, and do you really want to be competing under busy open homes, start getting back to auctions and then going, God, maybe how much easier would it have been to buy last year? I just think that's the real risk at the moment with people who are in a very fortunate position, could come back next year and regret it, which we saw in 2018, which we saw in 2019, which we saw in 2020. And I just don't want that to happen again for for people out there just sitting on their hands too much.
It's actually a really good point, because when it runs very quickly. And so, for instance, in beginning of 2020, just before COVID hit, clearance rates were up in the 80s. Like, it was a very, very hot beginning into the year. So we were going to have a boom 2020 if we didn't have COVID. That was absolutely on the cards. And people were saying to me, prices are starting to move and they're starting to freak out about it already. And I'm like, well, honestly, you should have bought last year. But you didn't. So let's deal with what you know. But I've been through so many of these market cycles now. Every time one comes around, I'm like, yep, here we go, Groundhog Day. Everyone's going to sit in their hands. They're going to wait for the market to bottom out before they actually get into it. They'll look for social proof, and then they'll all jump in when everyone else gets off the fence at exactly the same time. And it doesn't matter. I could talk to them blue in the face. Same thing's going to happen. And so I don't waste too much energy now trying to convince people. I'll tell them, I'll give them case studies and all that sort of stuff, but I don't get frustrated trying to convince people anymore like I used to in previous years. But I tell you what, I will give you a Dumbo. Actually, now I've thought about it while you're talking about that, because you said, look, good time to use buyer's agents. And absolutely, one of the benefits of using a good buyer's agent, and there's unfortunately a lot of crap ones out there. So finding a good one is somebody who really understands that local market so well that they can identify that A-grade property and save you from accidentally buying a dud, right? Because if you haven't been in that market day in, day out, you're not going to know. And also there's less property on the market in a downturn. So therefore, even then you've got less to sift through to understand really what's a good one, what's not a good one. And so the challenge in a hot market is that people pay overs for everything. And so my argument in a hot market is, if you're going to pay overs, and you have to buy a property, make sure it's a good one. Don't pay overs for dud, right? There's a real benefit in using a good buyer's agent who will help you work out what's the difference. In a slow market, you're in danger of buying a dud because of the pure absence of good properties. And so being patient and knowing to wait, because that's not good enough. That's really where a great buyer's agent will help you and to hold you back from the impatience of, but there's nothing on the market, I'm just going to have to buy something. And so there's a different type of FOMO that can kick in when you're trying to find a property. Once you've made your mind up, once you decide to commit to buying a property, and then you find there's a dearth of listings to choose from, you're going to, human nature can quite often start making compromises just to get into the market, even though it's not a hot market and there's not FOMO in the other traditional sense. The big Dumbo I'm going to point out here is because I've actually been running a pilot program. It's a mentoring program for new buyer's agents. And I've just in the middle of running this pilot program, and it's been fascinating. I've been distilling my over 22 years of experience now into these modules and then working on implementation programs so we can create a batch of great buyer's agents rather than the proliferation of very, very ordinary ones that are out there and that have come into the market and flooded into the market in recent years. You know what the Dumbo is though? You can get your buyer's agent's license or your real estate license. You can be fully qualified, right? In most states, you can even set up business without having any experience, never working in a real estate agency or a buyer's agency ever, right? That's in most states, not all states. What happens is if you go and get your real estate license, as in most states, what you're getting is a real estate license. And so effectively those license courses are designed to teach people how to sell property and to be property managers. They're not teaching you how to buy property. And so therefore, people coming out with qualification, able to act and operate as a buyer's agent, and they don't even realize they need to do due diligence. They don't even know. And it's an absolute revelation for them that in order to buy a property, it's not just the flip side of the sales process. There's a hell of a lot more involved. And I guess it's only been when I've been sitting down to put together this material, literally this week I've been doing the due diligence module, I've been horrified when I've realised the exposure that consumers have when they're going with buyer's agents who don't know how to do due diligence. And this is a Dumbo, not just of the individual buyer's agents for not realising, this is a Dumbo of the system, that you can actually become licensed and get all the way to become a buyer's agent, set up your own business and not know the most fundamental due diligence that needs to be done. Horrific.
Yeah, I think the buyer's agency world is going through a bit of a change here. I think if you didn't have the great experience and didn't really know what you're doing, it's going to be pretty tough right now, right? And so I do think that the market's probably going to do a lot of
weed them out.
Weed them out. I do think so, and I do. We see some amazing results with buyer's agents, and we're really supportive. The ones that are that local experience and have been in that market for a long time, etc. And you really need to differentiate between. Also, we see what people are working with their friends who are new buyers agents or family friends, and and believing their spiel about how many properties they've got and all that sort of stuff, and just all of a sudden blindly just thinking the friendship or the family relationships is the reason to use them. And so just be very careful who you're in. And it sounds like I'd be interested to do that buyers agents course as well.
Well, I'll let you know when the evergreen version is live. And if anyone is interested in becoming a buyer's agent, by the way, you can jump. I've got a Facebook page. It's simple as jumping on it. It's called I Want to Be a Buyer's Agent. So just jump in, join the group, and you can join in the chats. And if you want to know more, I can tell you more in that space.
Awesome. Great conversation, Veronica. We'll talk to you all soon.
If you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or North Shore, my team and I can help you buy without regrets. Reach out via my website, gooddeeds.com.au.
If you're looking to buy your first home, thinking of upgrading into a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, my team love to carefully guide you on this journey. And most importantly, get the finance right. Reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to see you again.
And remember, don't be a Dumbo.